broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing well today. Welcome to the next part in the leadership series provided to you by MTM Services and the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. I'm David Swann, your presenter for today, and I'm the Senior Healthcare Integration Consultant with MTM Services, and glad to be with you. I'm on the East Coast, so it is just right around 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I know we've got people from all of the time zones across the nation. We usually start these at 1 when we do these national programs, so that so that people from California can be on as well, and even Hawaii and Alaska, and it's not too extraordinarily difficult with time. So glad you're with us today. Thank you for being a part of this leadership. If this is not your first one, we welcome you now to, I believe this is the 4th one in the series. What you see on your screen now is all of my colleagues from MTM Services, and we're all bringing you this process through the summer. We do have 2 more, actually, if you include this one today. This one is making every leadership moment matter today, as you'll see. We have another one that was had to be recently canceled, which was scheduled for August 23rd. And then the final part in the series is going to be September the 6th, and you'll see my colleague Scott Lloyd will be doing that. Indecision has a cost on workforce and the cost of care. So we're glad to be bringing you all this today. A little bit about me. I hope I sound young. I am not. If I do, and many of you who know me maybe will know particularly, but this is my 40th year of mental health, and I am kind of looking more in the rearview mirror than I am in forward through the window glass now. It's just been a very, very long career, but a great and enriching career that has given me lots of opportunities. I have run behavioral health organizations that are provider organizations, and also had the wonderful opportunity of being a leader in a managed care organization as well in the last decade of my full-time career. And first began my relationship with MTM Services way back in 1995, when I was an early client of MTM Services, and my colleague and founder of MTM Services, David Lloyd. Some of you know him, and you might have heard his leadership program that actually launched the summer series that we're doing back at the end of June. So a couple of things that are of mentioning is that co-author of the book Operationalizing Healthcare Reform, that was published by the National Council for Mental Wellbeing and is for sale through their bookstore. Also, I provide consultation now in retirement, and I have done so in training to hundreds of community behavioral health centers and managed care organizations across the country. I think only about 2 states I have not been to or worked in, but I'm pleased to be able to do that in a lot of places. And if you have been one of my client organizations that you represent, then know that I'm proud to have been invited to help your organization, and I hope that we were successful. I'm actually a retired executive of a community behavioral health organization and a managing entity that manage both Medicaid and state funds. Those of you in that sector of our business will know those as managed care organizations, or MCOs. And I'm from North Carolina, where this accent comes from, as well as all this experience. I have devoted all of my 40 years to being in North Carolina and working in the mental health system, but retired in 2014 to do more MTM work. Another part of my work has been being an executive coach to healthcare executives, largely in the behavioral health care sector across the nation, and that has been an honor for me as well. And I just want to say, as you think about this leadership program today, I want you to be thinking about the kinds of leaders that have meant something to you. And I'll set up a slide for you to prompt you to think about that. That's coming up next. Let's start with just understanding these historical leadership challenges. I'm trying to strike a contrast to the healthcare system, and particularly behavioral healthcare in 2022, that it's different than it used to be. So we have to have different strategies. That's kind of the concept here. So a lot of the times in my leadership background, in my work, I started in 1982. There was all the time that was the recruitment and the human resources issues about staff performance and keeping the good staff, and what behaviors needed to be managed around, and what were the aptitudes and the attitudes of people. And it was all of those kind of things that gave us kind of those leadership challenges from a long time ago, and even up until a recent past. It was about staff training. What are the requirements? What are the licensure requirements? What are the skill sets people need? What are the competencies that they need? And how can we maintain those? How can we bring those up to to the standards that we need? And in order to do something differently, like bringing on an evidence-based practice or something like that, then what do we need to do to bring the whole skill set up across either a set of people or a department or the whole organization? Like, for example, that one of those I took on was bringing on motivational enhancement or motivational interviewing for everybody that touched a citizen or a client in person or by telephone or any other way, even electronically in writing. We wanted them to use motivational interviewing or motivational enhancement skills. So there was one of those. Compliance matters. Timely and accurate documentation submission, and to mitigate or to avoid risk. This was always something that we came into after the grant-funded years that I go back. If you've been around as long as I have, you might remember those days as well too. The times where we just got resources without having to turn in any data, or there were no claims in the early days in my life. We received grant dollars, and we were asked how we were doing after the end of the year, and we said we were doing really well, and then we asked for more money. It was just that straightforward. But now, we have compliance, and I am frequently running into organizations where there's some kind of a compliance problem, or maybe like a compliance failure or an oversight, and an organization is suffering as a result of that. So these things are becoming more in the recent past, in the last decade or so, and probably carry over even into the future. Internal customer services challenges between programs and departments, something else that leaders had to be involved in over my years, and still there today. These are the things that used to occupy some of our leadership time. And then anything related to the federal, state, or county, if you ever have relationships with those, you might receive money or have agreements or obligations, or the way that you're governed, then you have those obligations, and those are leadership challenges as well. And then the whole issue about claims processing and timely reporting back to payers like Medicaid and Medicare, any kind of state funding requirements and what those regulations are. All of those are examples of this historical leadership challenges. So we've all learned a lot about this from, I hope to say, maybe people like me. And let me say too that I learned the majority of my leadership things from my experience and the people that actually surrounded me. I'm not going to tell you in particular one detail. I'm going to tell you the context though of that. I learned how not to be a leader from a leader, and maybe you have that experience as well. And I learned how to be a leader from other leaders. Now I have taken a lot of education, and I've read a lot of books, and I've done a lot of things, but it was always for me the practical experience of a leader helping me. So I want you to think about your own trenches, how you learned and how you benefited from some of these. And as you self-reflect, because something I'm going to do for you today is to cause you to look in the mirror. I'm going to ask you to look in the mirror and look at yourself. How did a leader or a mentor, and so let's expand it for just a minute, because I would say some of the people in my life acted as mentors, but they still led me, and they led me for success. How did a leader or a mentor lead you for success in your past? And maybe remembering these times, what were some of the behaviors they used? In other words, how did they get you to pay attention to this? How did someone get me to change? I did get, and from some of you, some questions ahead of time, and I appreciate that. And I have incorporated those questions into this presentation, so you're going to see those if you submitted it. The next thing is that, did you get a custom fit? Did your leaders that were influential in your life, did they pull off a book, you know, and take a page out of a book and say, this is what we're going to do, and they do that for everybody? Or did they customize for you? Did they do something differently because of the way you were and the way that maybe you might respond? And then how long did it last? I often measure these things like booster shots, you know. A lot of us have experienced that in the last couple of years about getting boosters, and what does that mean? And boosters will make this effect last longer. Well, how do we keep the learning going? How do we keep the leadership learning going for all of us that are in leadership roles? It's a question a lot of people ask me when I'm doing executive coaching, is that, okay, I'll do some things differently now, and I think it's going to be good, but you know, from time to time, the people are going to change, or the environment will change, and I'll have to do something differently. And they're right. Leadership is really dynamic. And I want to present some things today, some concepts that I think about, again, to be to make every moment count in leadership, that doesn't take a long time, and it can be done really quickly and easily, but also is respectful of the dynamics of how leadership changes need to be. So I'd like for you to also just know that if you have been a part of my life in any way, I know there's a lot of people on today, and I know that I have been that over the years I've been surrounded by people who have been extremely helpful to me in my own leadership. And if you happen to be someone who I have led, then I also am grateful to you and what you have done by giving yourself to me as a way for me to lead you. And I hope that that has been a good and effective. And, you know, as you look back on things like I do more often now, you really hope that these are the ways that people will learn more. So today I want to impart onto you some of these quick and easy things that I believe will be really helpful, and that were so helpful to me. And I still think they're fresh. They are new enough. They're relevant in today's leadership work. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. A little bit more of the background here. Those historical things tend to produce what we at MTM, and my colleague David Lloyd again, has called this system noise. So David told me this when he first became my consultant years ago. And he said, you know, David, Swann, you've got a lot of system noise, and we got to quiet some of this down. We've got to deal with it, you know. So, and I'm thinking, I need to understand this system noise, so let me help you. So when we have this internal system noise, it causes us to focus energy on the internal staff and all these service delivery processes and challenges, and it's over and over again. It's repetitive. And this is what people say when they call me and they say, I'm just getting worn down. And so when they say that, they're talking about the noise. So each of you right now just got a smile on your face if you know what I'm talking about. So you know what this noise sounds like, you know what it feels like, and you know that it wears you down. And when you come home at the end of the day after a day of it, and we've got lots of analogies about the system noise that we might use. I'll pull out a couple just in a minute, but you know, you just feel so worn down. And let me say that the older I got, the less resilient I was for, I think, some of this. And it was my reminder that maybe retirement, you know, is going to be helpful to me, because I can keep some of this noise, you know, down. But it feels like, you know, that it's being, that your energy is being removed from you. And it's hard to recycle the energy. It's hard to regain the energy. Again, I want to say this is how I want to provide some antidotes to this today. I believe a lot of the things that go on in our leadership life now that makes leadership difficult is the result of this. We feel like that there's this repetitive process over and over again, and we're not making a stride in a system-wide change. So this older focus what we needed was something, that there was such a rapid pace that we had to change fast, that we had to do something differently. So it was more workable again when the external healthcare system just wasn't really moving a lot. But I'm just thinking about all the people that are on today. Think about this. What were you doing as a leader in a healthcare business in April of 2020? Let me just give you the answer to that, because we can't talk right now between each other. I'd love to be a dialogue. But if you weren't thinking that you had to turn your services into a virtual platform, then you weren't with 99% of other behavioral health service groups. So you see what's going on is that this was a big environmental change that required a dramatic and quick response. So I had organizations calling me in that first week of April and the last week of March of 2020, the first week of April in 2020. We have got to turn our system around. We got to do it this week. We've got to provide services to people that are going to be in their home, and the professionals are also going to be in their own homes. And we've got to get this service system moved from an out of office with all these barriers into a non-four walls treatment option that's got to be virtual and no touch. And I had organizations in parts of this country that started a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, touch-free, complete behavioral health system. And I watched this happen. And when I think about the kind of dramatic change that we saw at that time, this was about survival. If you could not do it fast enough, then people would go unserved, and lives potentially would be lost, and we would lose all of the revenue, or a significant portion of the revenue and the service capacity that we used to have. So this is big. This is big, and it's all part of what is now what we see in the 21st century healthcare system as a very rapid pace change healthcare system. So now, though, what are we doing? So what are these leadership focus areas now that behavioral health leaders have to think about? Well, I listen to people all the time tell me about what their struggles are, and here's a bunch of them. We got to change the system to provide whole person and coordinated care to support the total wellness needs of a population. Wow, that's big. If you are a CCBHC, a certified community behavioral health clinic, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is the model of a CCBHC. It's got to be coordinated. It's got to be wellness oriented. It's got to be whole person care. CCBHCs have integrated behavioral health and physical health care. They are co-occurring competence, so it doesn't matter the combination of conditions that you have. So this becomes again part of the challenge. There's one kind of in my past that I'll mention to you all, and this might resonate too with a lot of people. Remember, the person-centered leadership challenge is that we need to be person-centered, customer-centered, or consumer-driven, in our behavioral health work. And the challenge with that is that we said it a lot. And let me personally say, I said it, but if you were to have come to my mental health center 25 years ago, it would have looked like a mental health center that we built around us, the staff, not around our consumers. You can tell, there's some characteristics of a whole person coordinated care population driven organization by the characteristics that they have. There's a shift to population management models so that we're not talking about and focused on one person here and one person there. We're talking about managing a population. So there's synergy in this. So the services and the interventions we provide are synergistic to a whole population. We've also had to move away in the recent past of shifting from volume of services to value-based or risk-saving fund models. Another big push. There's more and more of that all the time. Enhanced access to care, performance requirements to like same-day clinical assessment, and within 3 days, getting access to a prescriber from a clinical assessment if that was needed. Observable and measurable client-centered outcomes, again, to support if clients are improving. This is real radical. I had somebody tell me several years ago, you mean you want us to measure the client's response to treatment? Yeah. Well, and if we do that, what does that mean? What if we're not producing the results, is what I heard, Well, that could mean something big. So cost finding per each CPT code that's used, and then thinking about episodes of care instead of once a client, always a client. You know what I'm talking about if you've been around mental health a long time. Making the business case for your agency to support service delivery contracts with MCOs like what I used to run, and also ACOs. So the readiness for entering into these kind of agreements, and then efficient quality and compliant documentation. All of this has really come about in the last decade, and is kind of some of those things that are really on the leaders' minds these days. And then the values: being accessible, being efficient, being connected. Many of you may have, like, the electronic health record now has a feature, and some of you maybe hopefully are using those, but the patient portal, where the patient can interact, or the client portal, they can interact with your staff and with the organization, so that there's a shared interest and a shared process, if you will, about improvements and what the clients take on. Being accountable, being resilient, and last but certainly not least, being sustainable, completing the value equation. If you're providing valued care, then that needs to be sustainable. If it does have value, if it's not sustainable, something's wrong with this. Quite possibly that's one that I get a lot of questions of as a consultant, is we need to be sustainable. Something's happened on the financial end, on the payer end. The rates are this, the expectations are this. We've got to be sustainable in this work. David Lloyd shared this information, if you attended his program in June, from the American Management Association, that the top 6 leadership challenges for leaders are getting people to work together who have different agendas or goals. Interesting about that. When leaders have different agendas or goals. So there's one of the talents of a skilled leader. How do we get people to have the common agenda and common goals? There's a way to do that. To balance the competing demands and priorities, motivate and inspire in a world of constant change. And the change is even fast-paced, but it's going to be constant. And like you, I'm sure you know that it is not going to change. It's not going to go to a slow pace. It'll never be a slow pace again. To accomplish difficult assignments without the necessary resources, to balance the needs of the organization with those of the individuals that comprise the organization, so the organization needs with the needs of individuals, and then to adjust to a faster pace and a more multidimensional job, so that it is normal to have the plates on the sticks spinning in the air at the same time. It is normal. It's a fast pace, but it's normal. So how do we lead to that? I wanted to just go down the road just a little bit about some of the things that we're experiencing across the country. And I don't think these are going to be totally new, but it's very fascinating. And this is coming again from a guy who's been in the mental health system for 40 years. And it's almost hard for me to believe when I step back into the 80s and I remember what I would think about as far as leading my system at that time compared to now. It just strikes me how dramatic this is. So the first big things that I've noticed in the last 5 or so years is the financial investments and the changing models of care. Look at, for example, in-home addiction treatment models. Now, this started before the pandemic, but it has, talk about timing, it was leaders that really were getting in the right place at the right time. Mobile addiction treatment clinics and in-home addiction treatment models. Some of the people that I used to work with would have said this: have you ever, now I'm in the South, and it's one of those sayings that, the shock and awe of this. Here's an example. Organizations offering in-home addiction treatment include one called Aware Recovery Care. And if you happen to be from that organization, welcome to the leadership program today, which is now in 7 of our 50 states and recently received an undisclosed amount of private equity investment for expansion. So when I was operating community mental health centers in the 80s and the 90s, to even think that someone would invest in us because they thought we could make money was just unheard of. And their phrase that they use, we provide a full continuum of home-based care, including in-home withdrawal management, medication-assisted treatment and management, individual therapy, family therapy, and coordinated medical and behavioral health care, all in-home and with mobile addiction possibilities. And so if you go on their website, you'll see some of this, but the questions I want you to think about are, we're leading organizations. If it's not like this, what do we need to do to continue to lead ours? Remember those things about the sustainability and looking for the opportunities and to lead in front of and not be behind. Here's another one, and I'm just introducing now a new way we describe this, these digital models of care. There's 3 that have just come to my attention recently: Work It, Work It Health, Quit Genius, and Pursue Care. Look at this. Work It recently announced a $118 million round of private equity investment to be used and expanded into new markets, providing digital drug addiction treatment. Their phrase, choose your goal, connect with a therapist, and rewire your brain. With that phrase, they've attracted $118 million. And this is actually last winter's information back in January. So there may have been a lot more by now. Quit Genius provides a digital clinic for treating multiple addictions. I'm finding lots of this in the addiction world. If you haven't figured it out, I've got some that are beyond that, but look at this, just about addiction, a $64 million investment in funding digital drug addiction treatment using the Quit Genius model. And then the Pursue Care, which does telehealth addiction treatment, announced it had reached $11 million in investor funding. Several more have come to my attention. Highmark has selected RIA Health to provide telehealth treatment for alcohol use disorders. Anthem, these are now big health plans. Okay, so now we've moved to providers. Now we've got health plans. These are these managing companies. These are what I ran in my last decade, a healthcare payer, now providing a care that, and we could be the providers in a network like this. So what do we need to do to think about this and to enter? What about Anthem? They announced a new contract with Boulder Care for a value-based contract in Ohio for Ohio telehealth addiction services. So just amazing about this. And then Pacific Source, they're contracting with Ideal Option Addiction Treatment for a bundled payment model in Oregon for office-based opioid treatment, the OBOT treatment. And then AmeriHealth in the District of Columbia has contracted with the Howard University Faculty Practice Plan, the university setting, Howard University, to test a new value-based payment model called Perform Plus New Beginnings, which is an episode model for substance use disorders. Again, lots of different things going on in the substance use world. Well, we get a lot of attention when we talk about retail health. And if you take any of the kind of newsletters or interesting things that I see come across my desk almost every day, there's at least once a week I'm hearing about retail health. And even in the last 7 days, I have heard about CVS, Walmart, and Amazon all in the last 7 days, again, about something that they're doing. CVS is providing mental health therapy and psychiatry services now through their pharmacies and in a mental health. So they're connected to the pharmacies, but again, it's actually a digital platform. Walmart is opening health care now to include mental health counseling. Dollar General has hired their first chief medical officer who's going to be providing telehealth and telemental health services at Dollar General. This one really gets a lot of everybody. Well, look around, and I live in rural North Carolina, and where I live, there are probably 4 Dollar Generals within about 5 miles of where I live in North Carolina. I'm in the mountainside on the western part of the state. So Dollar General is a place, it's a location that gets into rural America. And now here they go. They're finding, again, improving access to care, again, through Dollar General and using telehealth. And then Amazon. Amazon acquires One Medical in addition to other ventures to gain a greater presence in healthcare. And there was another one that came out that Amazon had bought in the last week, and I don't really remember that detail, but I just give these to you for information that this is what's going on in the healthcare sector, and we need to be interested in it, and we need to be observant, and we need to be leading all this. So change occurs swiftly. So it happens around us, and leading change requires efficiency. So there's some questions that some of you have posed, and I've got some of those coming up in just a minute. But one of those I just remember was, it's kind of how long, do I need to be in this change process with somebody? How do I motivate people that are burnt out, things like this? And we have to be more efficient with our change. I think the days are gone where that I would say to any of you today that you can have a year to get somebody that's a subordinate for you to change by leading them to be different. I'll give you 12 months to do it. It's just way too long. Change will have cycled 3, 4, 5 times before that year is up. And then the whole issue may be even a moot point at this time, looking back again at the investments in addiction treatment and what's going on with retail behavioral health treatment. I will tell you once again, here's another example of maybe the digital or anything. I was in a meeting, this was several years ago before the pandemic, and I was in person with a group of people. And there was the chief executive was in the room, and we were talking about the flexibility of services and the use of telehealth, and the flexibility issue was around clients were having barriers to coming during the workday, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and they had a lot of no-shows because people said you can't schedule this. When I want to come is like at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, or when I can bring my kids because they're in school, it's going to be at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. It was those kind of discussions that were going on. The subject was around customer service and same-day access to care. How do we do this when people are having all these different things? And the chief executive just happened to say, look, there's very limited capabilities that our staff and our organization could provide services to people with that level of flexibility. And I said, well, okay, that's sort of kind of shut this down, so we stopped exploring, this. So it was kind of not the leadership thing that I was hoping to look for, is that the other side of that would have been, what are the possibilities that we can come up with to make this better? So what we learned on the next day is that several of those employees at that organization were actually moonlighting at night and on the weekends with a national telehealth company. Did you get that now? Employees of a mental health center that the CEO was describing as entrenched. In other words, we can't make a change. There's no way I can get them to change this to be more customer friendly, more patient-centered, more consumer-driven. We can't do that here because our staff won't stand for that. And the staff had a luncheon at 5 o'clock, and they go and they have joined a national telehealth behavioral health company and are providing telehealth services after hours and on the weekends, earning additional resources and revenue, and providing services in their own town and in their own state because that's where they hold a license. This was quite remarkable. And when the CEO learned of this, it was quite the change. So let me just say, this is maybe not the way you want to learn about how flexible that your organization can be. Not after the fact that the staff left that whatever we had the appearance of, this was a rigid organization without this flexible capabilities. The staff told them the rest of the story that this is not the case. So successful leaders, again, affect change more rapidly. They're looking for those opportunities and to make it happen. And then this extended time consumption is just not going to be able to get this done. So, well, you can, like me, you can find all kinds of leadership definitions and things like this. I noticed that David Lloyd put several in his slide deck back in June, since David Lloyd is one of my mentors and a leader that I had looked up to and respected. I also wanted to put one of his in here, and you'll see that one in the bottom. It's located in his book. Leadership is a willingness to assume the risk of matching the authority to lead with the responsibility. So the two key words here, you have the authority to lead and you have the responsibility. So David was encouraging us through these words to claim both of these. In other words, don't try to lead only with authority. In other words, I'm the chief executive, I'm the director, I'm the manager, do what I say. That's leading with an authority. The responsibility is drawing or pulling on staff to convince them and encourage them with possibility thinking that we can make these kinds of changes. Looking back at the top, an oldie but goodie for me. I was just a popular reader of Jim Collins over the years. You might remember the book Good to Great was one of the first big ones about how do leaders succeed in this business world of all kinds of leaders. How's this work? So he says great leadership at the top doesn't amount to much without great leadership at the unit level. So he gave us a whole different perspective about that, about what we invest in the growth of leaders. All of us, if we feel like we're at the pinnacle of leadership, maybe you've been doing it for 40 years, or if you're just starting, there is a ladder. There is a gradual ladder that you grow up in and that you learn in. And Jim Collins didn't want us to forget that we need great leadership at the unit level. And you would know that his word, the operative word that he would use, would be great, because that is based on all of his books. It's always about great. And then John Agnew, leadership is an interactive conversation that pulls people towards becoming comfortable with the language of personal responsibility and commitment. I like this one because it's about that pulling people towards something instead of pushing them. We don't pull them, we encourage them to follow us. So, you know, there's a lot of other ways to define this. How do you know that you're a leader? If you've got somebody that follows you. Isn't it understandable that how can you say you lead if you have no one that follows? And how can you say that you follow someone if you don't have anybody that's leading you? So leaders need followers, followers need leaders as well. And so that's the way that we see that. And I think he helps us about to understand that. So, well, looking at the healthcare reform era, again, a number of things that are important here is that the willingness, again, to step across the threshold of risk, to make bold and creative decisions. Now, let me state, and those of you, if you know me, I ran a public organization. It was a community behavioral health center. It was beholden to the public. It was affiliated with both local government and the state. And so there was anything that was risky always scared me because the more risk that you take for these bold and creative decisions, the likelihood that you might find yourself above the fold on the front page of the newspaper was high. Or you get a call from some state authority. The government, calls and says, "What's this about? What's going on?" So think about that. I think this is always a challenge: is that can we step across that threshold of risk and do something that's bold or do something creative? Strong leaders are more than likely able to do that. And I think, I'm not just respecting the barriers that we have. I'm telling you that I felt those. But I also know that some of the risks that we took and some of the risks that I led was also calculated, and it was good, and we were largely successful with those. So I believe you can do the same. We also need to make tough decisions in an era of change and stick with them in the face of challenge. The most frequent one that I kind of see a lot is when people say, we need to get people to perform at a higher volume or do more work in order to be financially sustainable. But if I make that a mandatory requirement, they're going to leave. So you've been there, right? I mean, this is a popular thing. No matter what kind of service system that you're managing, is that if you're If you're running a manufacturing plant, you got the same particular problem. It's what is the product? The product for us is healthcare. It's behavioral healthcare. What is what is the product? How do we get paid for the product? Well, if you're in a fee-for-service environment, you get paid for the number of products you produce. And if you were in a value-based payment arrangement, you get paid not for the number of products, but for what the product does to people. How does it help them to live a better life if they're the recipients of care? So then you think, what tools are needed to support the minimizing the leadership decision-making risk? I mean, how can we minimize that, but still get the work done and get the leading done? And then moving from kind of program-driven to clinically driven leadership and outcomes-driven treatment. So it's about the recipients of care. So those of you who do know me that know that that's how I operate mostly, is that I always put the client in that machine, that this is what we have to have an impact on. So if we're going to do something, will we have an impact there? And it will be a positive impact for people and for their lives. So early on in my career, I got started with some of this, but it was around 2008, and I put the date up here, where I ran into work at the Harvard Business School that applied to us, and that was very helpful. And this author was Judith Ross, who was actually writing for the Harvard Business Review, and she was reporting on a work that was going on in the great state of Nebraska at the university there. It's a leadership institute, and you see the two folks down below that I give credit to a lot of this. They are organizational psychologists type people. And so they were providing help to us. So I'll introduce some of these concepts and how I think maybe that we can use this again to make every leadership moment count, so we can be quick. So first, let's think about what's kind of goes on now. So in the here and now, I just bet that if you again look at yourself and you look at your organization, this is something that we see when we're trying to create change. So we see that denial. So our staff really deny that this is needed. So a lot of times for me, it was, well, that data is not accurate. That's the wrong data. If we were using data to drive a decision, if we didn't use data to drive the decision, then it was about our opinions or about an instinct, and staff would just say, well, we deny that also. So there was this denial, and I want to describe this as a process. You will, if you're a mental health professional and you understand the Prochaska's change model, if you have looked up any kind of acceptance of difficult processes and things, if you understand cognitive behavioral therapy, you know this to be a cyclical process. People start off denying, then they start negotiating. They might get angry next, and they might blame. Then they drop out. Then they may accept the need for a change, and then they get excited about taking the advantage opportunities. It is a cycle. And sometimes people skip steps. Some people don't skip any steps. And some people, as some of the questions that I got, I knew that you knew what we were talking about here, because you said people will recycle it back and forth. They'll start over again with the same thing. In other words, they regress. And that is true. So we start by that denial. Then we want to negotiate. This is that approach again to push staff to change. So how can I convince you to make the change? That's that negotiation process. If this is about the good of clients, is where I would go about this, or this is the good of the organization, and the good of the organization will lead to something better for clients, then that is negotiating. And I'm suggesting that this doesn't have a very successful place in this change process. It doesn't really lead to some of the things that we need. Anger, the blaming, both outside and then inside. It's all of them outside, or it's the government. In my case, it was, frequently it was the state. That state, we didn't like the state telling us what we were going to do. And no matter where you're at, if you've worked in any government mental health service, you probably have experienced that thought or that feeling, because all of these things. I mean, no matter where you're at, we all have those things where governments do things, and somebody's not going to like it. It is a fact of life. then people just drop out. And, you may be like me, you've had people to leave. It's awful. I'm just not going to do this. I want to tell you about an experience I had. Again, I'm never going to disclose where and for whom this was, but I will say this was in a mental health program somewhere in America. And there was some change processes going on. And yes, I was a consultant helping to advise on the change processes. And there was a person with a license to practice mental health that got involved at the table. And this person said that the change process that they were undertaking was so bad that it was traumatic and was creating trauma upon that person, and that it may be trauma that they could not bear. Now, so as you're listening to me say this, you think, what if this happened to you? You're in a room full of mental health professionals that all work for the same common goal, the same mission, vision, and purpose of an organization. And to change, to do something better for people that would cause one of the individuals to believe that they were traumatized in such a way that it would even give them a disorder. That's the way this was described. I don't know that this has only happened to me once in my career. I hope it doesn't happen again, but it has happened once. This was an egregious example of this fourth step. It's not just I'm dropping out or it's awful, but I have been harmed by the change. Now, let's not forget, the change was better for the recipients of care, which was the product that they were to deliver. But again, the person couldn't make the commitment and couldn't get past their own trauma over this. Then there's that acceptance again, and then you have the people that are excited about taking advantage of the opportunities. And I know a lot of you are at level 6 already, but just thinking about that, about how that happens. So this progression, we sometimes call that the dance, and again, people do replay the music and they do it all over again sometimes. So here were 3 of the key questions that I got from some of you in the last couple of weeks as we were leading up to this day in this program. About how do I respond to staff when they tell me they're burned out in their career? How to best engage directors and managers in helping to create reachable and stretch goals for the department? That's a beautiful question. I love the term reachable, and because that it always should be reachable. I've got some helps for you about that one. And what are your recommendations for overcoming change resistance that comes from other agency leaders or peers or superiors? Don't forget that going back one slide, that there's a lot of other people that might not be subordinates. And that question was interesting. What about other directors or managers in the organization that are equal to you, if you're not at the top of the chain, but they're equal to you and they want to resist. They want to do number 2, number 3, and number 4 here. This is what that question was about. That's again, very intelligent and good thinking questions. So the concept here from the University of Nebraska was building psychological capital. So this is how we can do something efficient and effective. So bear with me here as I kind of just go through these principles and tell you how you can do this. Now, you're going to recognize a couple of concepts about this. So the concepts are that this is more like, this is about thoughts and then about actions. So if you're a cognitive behavioral certified therapist, like I am, then you would know this is behavioral activation, but it means that you act differently. It always has a behavior. And what we look at, again, is consistency of behavior among the leaders in order to follow through and to create the psychological capital. So you can use a lot of analogies for this. In some of the things that I do, I might talk about the bank account. I need to build up bank account information. I need to build things up in the bank account. I used to joke a lot at work around when I was working full time at my office about how that I had to do something nice for my wife because I needed to build up some of the bank account. I needed to make an investment because I had taken out, I'd withdrawn a lot, and usually the withdrawal from the bank account when you're the mental health chief executive is that you're working all the time, or you're working too much, or you might not be paying as much attention to the family things and to the home things that you would like to do because the work is occupying your time. It's keeping you away. So this again is very similar. Again, how can you build some psychological capital? So I want you to first become aware of your own capital and the building that of your followers. So how are you with efficacy? Again, do you, the leader and the followers' level of confidence, how will you convince people that you have confidence in them to succeed at a particular challenge? You see the word efficacy here. How will you have an impact? So, you know, a lot of people will describe this as the inspiring leader. They inspire us to greatness. That maybe is a Jim Collins a part of it. They'll cause us to aspire to succeed. They'll cause us to aspire. To inspire to to exceed our goals. So, what is our efficacy? Again, this is a catalyst question. How do we do that? How do we execute the ability to build confidence that people will succeed to this? I used to say something like this in my organization when we had a big challenge and we needed to step up, and first off, I wanted everybody to agree, and that may not always be the right thing to do, but I liked it when it happens. And I would say it this way: when we all agree that this is the direction that we go and the height of the hurdle that we're going to do it, that we're going to excel, we will be successful. There is nothing that we will not succeed in if we all commit to each other that we're going to be successful. So I was building that confidence, when I would say something like that, building the psychological capital, if you will, the optimism. How do you communicate your expectation of positive outcomes? This is really this is a difficult and challenging question. Look in the mirror, and you don't have to disclose that to any of us. Not asking you to do that today, but how do you communicate your expectation of positive outcomes, that you will succeed, you will achieve this goal, you will do this? So remember the word reasonable. That was in one of those questions. If I set an unreasonable goal or an objective for a person that's one of my followers, and then I set an expectation of positive outcomes, but remember the objective, the hurdle, the thing they had to jump over was unreasonable, there we have a conflict. So you see how that question leads right into this. To do this, to have the optimism, we must know our staff. And we also must have a very good idea of their skill sets and their capabilities. So this is the first thing I encourage you to: the people that follow you, learn about their capabilities. And I'm going to give you some examples in a little bit, but shine a light on that. Then hope. This is that tendency to look for alternative pathways to reach a desired goal. So for all of you who've been trained in motivational interview, and I mentioned this a while ago, or motivational enhancement, you know exactly what I'm thinking. Motivational enhancement, motivational interviewing are all about taking someone that is on the fence, that's ambivalent, and resolving the ambivalence. We want them to get off of that middle ground. We want them to go from one side or the other. We hope they'll go to the side, maybe that's going to be the health and optimism side, but we've got to get them to let go of the ambivalence and to choose a side. So the alternative pathways are problem solving to reach a desired goal. So the hope, again, and building this in this capability, that we hope for the best, and we're going to continue to look for alternative pathways. So the person who always says no to something. Not that this is a good thing for anybody named Debbie, but if you've ever watched the Saturday Night Live skit and you've seen the Debbie Downer one, this is part of that. Now, some of you are laughing or smiling, and you start thinking about people in your life that maybe are like that, and we all have those people. But we can use hope actually to inspire alternative pathways. So every barrier, there is another option. What was it? In the movie or the play, The Sound of Music, when the door closes, there's going to be a window we can open. You're always looking for the alternative pathway. this is a skill that you can use to build psychological capital. So I encourage you to examine your hopefulness, how you do that. And then your resilience, the ability to bounce back from any setback or failure and keep forging ahead. So this is now about the leaders, and it's also about the followers. We need this as leaders. I'm going to put every one of you today in as a leader, but then let's also say we're all followers, because we probably are. We always are. I am following people right now that I believe that inspire me again for greatness. One of those is my colleague David Lloyd, who some of you have met, some of you again maybe have heard his presentation back in June. So I'm always looking for David to stimulate me and give me the ability to gain some new psychological capital. So people like that will do that, and it provides resilience to the follower and to the leader to keep forging ahead for this. So it's an honest assessment that I'm encouraging. How do you motivate and lead others? This is now more specific. This is a good slide for you to get and to try to make some commitments to look at. So this slide deck is going to be available after the program, and we are recording this, as you know, too, so you can get the slides and you can get the recording from this, and we'll tell you about that at the end. But how do you motivate and lead others to make significant change? We may be mental health professionals, but we do need to practice what we know that works. So I remember my father a long time ago in the early 80s, when I was getting close to finishing up graduate school, said this to me. And he was a businessman in a Fortune 500 company, and he was an accountant, and so he did numbers all the time, and he didn't really deal with people that much. Although he had a customer base that was in tire stores. He worked for Firestone. So he said, let me understand this. Talking about like a psychologist here, he said, so people are going to pay you money, and you're going to tell them how to live, and they're going to do it. And that was as simple as he wanted to understand it. Now you think about an accountant and how they see the practice of psychology. This is what he thought this might be like. So we need to practice what we know that works. It's not just telling people to do something again. You go back to those 4 things to build psychological capital. That's how we help people to make changes. We need to become aware of our own behavior. It allows us to change the behavior. There's this awareness, and now we have the behavioral activation, or something we're going to do differently. These are cognitive behavioral concepts. So we know this. We're mental health professionals, or we're a business person living in a mental health world. If that's your part, that's okay too. You're surrounded by a lot of mental health people. Glean this from them and try to help change your behavior so that you can lead others as well. Evaluate your positive and your negative responses to leadership challenges and the opportunities and incidents, and then evaluate these to determine if they make the grade. And as I always say, ask someone else. This is a question that I ask the people, the executives that I coach. Tell me something about a positive response to a leadership challenge that's happened in the last week, and tell me about a negative response that you've had to a leadership challenge in the last week, and let's talk about that. And so they get the opportunity to ask an independent third party that question. They'll ask me that, and I get to hear and to help them to figure out what they could do differently for those. So evaluate those. Making our changes in all of these, the efficacy, optimism, hope, and resilience, whenever you can, grab hold of one of those 4 and do something differently. So get closer to this. Effective leaders can make change happen quickly using these 4 states of psychological capital. So here's our helps. So in every one of these slides coming up now, I've got a specific behavior you can do. First one, pointing out successes. So, and I'm going to say specifically, you got to be real specific. So you want to highlight the success, and again, and be real specific, not broad in general. The broader in general pointing these out strategies don't usually create the memory in the follower as long as it does if you are very specific. The specificity allows them to know that you know them and you've seen that. So whenever you think about doing this, if you can think about what the next more specific level would be. So I'll give you an example, of that presentation that you made was good. So that would be if someone said to me after this, you send me an email or something, you say, hey, David, that presentation you did today for the National Council for Mental Wellbeing was good. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So that was a highlight of success. Now, let's say it in a different way. Hey, David, the presentation you did today for the National Council on leadership gave me a new way to inspire others through being specific in pointing out successes. Now I know you were paying attention to what I did. Now, if I was following you, then now you have just created a whole bank of psychological capital. You see that, how that works? The bigger, the more specific, the greater the bank account of the psychological capital is built. Because they, again, your followers will say, she knows me, he knows me, they know what I did. It's very specific. My son is 31 years old, and he's coming along in the same arena, working in a behavioral health care field, focusing on children. And I'll tend to listen to him a lot about what he tells me about what his supervisor says and how a supervisor is. And I don't know that they're even on this meeting today. They could very well be. And so, but I'm always listening to his administration and how they are, if they're specific or not, with highlighting successes on what he might do. So the best thing we can do, be specific. Next, about pointing out these successes, set short-term time frames for observable outcomes and results. Short-term. Again, the word reasonable was asking that question earlier. Set reasonable objectives, reasonable targets. Make sure that you believe that they can achieve what you want in a certain time frame. I've been doing strategic planning this morning, and one of the comments I made about strategic planning is to don't set a goal that has a year, 2 years, 3 years out there without an objective or a number of objectives that are milestones in 30-day intervals, 60-day intervals, 90-day intervals, something smaller that you can get a quick win out of, and that are shorter term time frames that are motivating. They're self-motivating. They're stepping stones across the river. So we want to get across the river, but the river's deep. Well, we see stones, but we've got to name them, and we've got to put the stones to go out there. We're going to spotlight those quick wins, and we're going to experience that success. So you want to enjoy and experience that success. I hope you see that this is building that psychological capital. It's like a kinetic energy process. The more successes that you have, then the longer the person can continue to make that change, and they're encouraged to do so. By the way, everything that I'm describing right now is also a psychological principle about the counseling, psychotherapy theories and all of this, that we want clients to experience success and to move forward towards goals and objectives. And when they experience success in short ones, then they're energized to continue the work, to continue the process. It's motivating, making progress. You also, again, I said specific earlier, the earlier bullet. Now, the fourth one is to be detailed about the contribution. So that's just another way of saying that specificity, and I gave you that example. Be detailed about the contributions made to make the success meaningful and replicable. So if I get a phone call or an email from John, whoever that might be, and John says to me, David, the way you presented that psychological capital example was really helpful to me, and I can do something with that today. See, that's a piece of information that's feedback for me that I was real successful at being specific and also detailed about it. So it doesn't help. I mean, it doesn't hurt to be able to get down into the weeds about something like this so that you know you're seeing the grains of sand around the grass. So a question for everybody to think about, not to answer because we don't have time for a big dialogue today or interaction, but how do I respond to staff when they tell me that they're burnt out in their career? Well, that was a question that's one of you posed for me. So how do we respond looking at this? We got to point out their successes. See, I don't know the details about this question, but it could very well be that the person who is burned out feels like that they have such long-term future goals way down the line that they will never be able to achieve those. So this sounds like a person that's not having any quick wins. They're not having any motivation that comes about from the successes that come really easy. And if they are having those successes, maybe we're not recognizing them as leaders. So you see the idea here is that how can we do it? So this is my answer to that person. I don't know who the name is that asked that, but if you ask this question or if you ever feel like that you have people that are experiencing this burnout and it's across their career, and how do I respond to them? We need to give them specific work plans. We need to set goals and objectives for them that are reasonable, and we need to have the quick wins for some of those reasonable objectives. That will energize them to do this and look for it. And then the leaders need to point out the successes with specificity and with how that contributed to something successful at the organization or to other people. I think for the clinical people, you know, that are actually doing direct service care, what a great way to see or to recognize one of them by saying that because of their clinical skill set, a recipient of care, a client, a consumer, a program member of the care system improved in such a way that they improved their function and their symptoms of a mental health condition reduced in a measurable and observable way. What a great thing to be able to recognize if that was you. So if you're a clinical supervisor and you see that, and I would say, you know, if you're a clinical supervisor, you should be looking for this, you know, and maybe you don't see that, but look again for the successes. Don't just point out failures. So now, building on strengths, we do need to focus on areas of performance where people have already demonstrated competence. So that's another thing that we can use to continue to build on their strengths. So when someone has already demonstrated competence, expect that, and then how can they rise up even further? So that's another, this is where that stretch goal comes. So I use stretch goals a lot in my leadership work and my executive coaching, but I want to say that stretch goals, we need to be careful with those. Are stretch goals still achievable? They're not too far out there. They're not too high of a bar or too steep of a mountain to be able to climb. Just be very careful about that. Communication is definitely the key here also as a part of this. So don't forget some of these kind of things that come about from some of the work and some of the studies that we see. About 22% of employees strongly agree that leadership of their organization has a clear direction of the organization. Only 22%. 15% of employees strongly agree that leadership makes them enthusiastic about the future, and 13% of employees strongly agree the leadership of their organization communicates effectively with the rest of the organization. You see, in this, with what we're learning here, we need to be able to use the psychological capital 4 elements to try to improve that. So communication and behavior must go together. So let's not forget that. So in what we do and how we interact with staff, communicate, use integrity. We must be inclusive. And when we make an error about inclusion, we got to apologize for that. And we got to correct that. I have made that mistake a number of times. If some of you are some of the people that have worked with me, you know, you might say he's made it many, many, many times. But I've just I just didn't include somebody that should have been in something. And again, the sensitivity to the needs of the employees round out these qualities kind of and characteristics of an inspirational leader. No one who is inspired by a leader who people think does not care about them. So we have to communicate and we have to behave in that way. Your communication will let people know that you care about them, or it will let people know that you don't. So that's the communication and behavior slant about this. So here's another one of those tips. Design challenging but reachable goals. So we mentioned this a little while ago, I'm going to just be more detailed about it so we can do that. So use positive targets that are observable rather than negative targets, such as avoiding improper CPT coding. So I do a lot of coding work. Some of you I might have done some of that work for. I do a lot of auditing, things like that, and the proper CPT code matching. So rather than saying to someone, you don't do CPT coding well, look at the positive targets. If you can set these reachable goals that are observable rather than negative targets, we want you to be successful at CPT coding, accuracy at CPT coding. So if you've ever had any of that work with me, I use that kind of phrase. Accuracy on CPT coding is what we want. So it goes back to, again, one of those leadership challenges that you could have, in your organization about this. So then using observable objectives, setting targets that are achievable in a shorter period of time, I mentioned this earlier, considered as milestones on the way to the goal. So when it comes to this, how do we best engage people in helping to create reachable and stretch goals for their departments? This is a question, again, that was posed by you all, you remember. And so I'm going to suggest for this one, we use the stepwise approach for these short-term successes. Remember what Jim Collins's leadership definition was, is that it's not good, I'm paraphrasing now, it's not good to only have a competent leader at the top of the group. We have to have good leaders in the manager roles, the director roles. So this person asked how to best engage the directors and managers in helping to create these reachable and stretch goals for their departments. Use this stepwise approach, coach them, lead them in setting these reasonable and measurable and quick win types of goals for people. This is really important. Again, it will build the psychological capital along those 4 dimensions that we talked about. Now, what are these leadership qualities that help to thrust us into this psychological capital thing? It's all about this relationship between the employee and their manager or supervisor in one level, or the manager or supervisor in the upper leadership. It's that this is about the key to this. So you approach this with strengths-based management. Again, it's not a focus on the negative, a focus on the positive. I know that probably sounds kind of weird, but it's one of those things that, because sometimes we got to be factual, and that's truth, but we also need to be strength-based. So we emphasize this a lot with our client and clinical work, but I want to recommend this as a strategy also for leaders, for their management work, their leadership work, strength-based thinking. Employees or enhance employees' well-being. So again, do we care about people or do we not? Remember the story I told you about someone saying that this change has created trauma on me that I may not be able to recover from? That's kind of how that was stated in that meeting. This shook up the whole leadership, because it was like we thought we were kind of taking care of everybody. So this was an example where the message was loud and clear that there was some trauma being experienced, and everybody went to this kind of pause, which is okay to do. But I think the reasonable approach here too would be to make sure that whatever we do is going to be about the employee's well-being as much as we can, but also thinking about the client's well-being, the recipient of care, because of the business that we're in. Then encouragement, trust, and support. Easy, simple words that we all understand, that if we use these, we will create, again, greater psychological capital and then do this. Now, another way to build the psychological capital is to provide resources and encourage exploration. And so you anticipate the obstacles and the setback. So the leader is good at seeing over the mountaintop. The leaders from Gettysburg, I've been up to Gettysburg and saw what went on, and they were looking forward, thinking they were looking beyond the horizon or over the horizon to see what's coming. We needed that kind of surveillance. So leaders do this very well. Sometimes it's a little bit of a negative language, but I use something like called the failure mode analysis. In other words, you're asking the question, what will be an obstacle or a setback? And let's create the alternate pathways before those obstacles and setbacks hit us. And then we work around those challenges. So this inspires hope. So another one of those things that inspires people. When leaders acknowledge that there are options and permission is achieved, in order to get this end is open. So the end, that end result, is still something that we're looking at. And we have not forgone that, but there's multiple ways of getting to the end. And when people know that they have permission to move around, the flexibility to choose a different pathway to reach the end, and that is good with the leaders, we're creating, the opportunities for people to explore. That's the resources that they can have and that maybe they can grab hold of that might help. Skill building could always be helpful in this about, what does someone need? If someone says, I need to be trained in this, I need to attend that leadership thing that MTM guy did today, whatever the case may be, skill building can be helpful to help this. And so it's our job as leaders to make sure that we're providing the right resources for people to have. And then developing that knowledge of all the resources that are available. So, you think about your case management staff, if you happen to have some of those, their kind of idea of their big important work is how do they marshal all the resources that they have, and how do they get their hands on all of it, and do they get a bank of resources? I'm fascinated sometimes with how stymied mental health professionals and leaders are with there's no way out but this. And I see all kinds of possibilities, but I tend to come in sometimes as a third party, and I might have a different lens about this, about why can't we do it this way to get the end result? Instead of saying no, I look for the possibility again. So again, identifying alternative pathways and resources, this is incumbent upon the leader to be able to do that. Now, when something goes wrong, you have to address obstacles factually. So I'm not saying candy coat that or sugarcoat it, but to build a psychological capital, you address them factually whenever a success is not achieved. The leaders, again, must interact when the setback occurs. And don't be silent. If you are silent, you will not be building that psychological capital. We need to be factually based about this. So we didn't get this done. We didn't get this in by the time. We didn't finish this. We didn't make this happen. So those are observable things. You've got to be factual, but avoid the entrenched guilt, avoid the pity, avoid the redirected blame and reminders of failures while simultaneously remaining accountable. So I'm not suggesting to not be accountable. Again, factually, we need to be accountable. I think that helps to build psychological capital. But if we do this entrenched guilt, pity, and redirected blame, we diminish that capital. Relentlessly state the facts and what could not be controlled, that is fact. If it could have been controlled, then let's not use that as fact. It's what could not have been controlled, completely out of our realm, completely out of our sphere of influence. And then acknowledge what needs to improve and remind all of what was correctly done. Again, looking at the strengths there, what was correctly done about this, and it's your kind of halftime message if you're a sports enthusiast. It's what does the coach say when you're down at the halftime and you get your team together? What do we say? We identify the facts, we build on the strengths, we go back out there and re-energize them. So don't take that away. So take every planned and unplanned opportunity. So every day you're going to get these, planned and unplanned. And if you resent the unplanned particularly, and by the way, the unplanned will likely happen more often than the planned. So get used to that. That's, again, the stamina of a leader. When the unplanned happens, we need to build this psychological capital, and we need to seize those moments. Because if you don't seize the moment and you don't impact better care, which is maybe your end game at the moment, you will have lost an opportunity. Leaders to directors, directors to managers, managers to direct care staff, and then to the recipients of care. You see the line of communication and how that can happen. Now, inspire with actions. An inspirational leader gives people what they want within their capabilities. So make every leadership moment count by inspiring, action-oriented. The inspirational leader also understands praise and recognition, reward, saying thank you, and noticing an individual's contribution to a successful endeavor is actually motivating. So I've said a little bit about that, but I just wanted to say more kind of as we move to the end of our program and see what kind of questions you might have. And then speaking directly to a contributing employee about the value of their work provides for the organization, and what it provides is just a key source of inspiration for the recipient of that message. However that is, I mean, I challenge you to go out and do that this afternoon. We all have things. I want you to open your eyes to these leadership moments. So I think that every time you have one, it is an opportunity, rather than resent the opportunities. So I don't know if you had the same thing happen to you in your work life, but I kind of knew the footsteps and the sounds of the footsteps with some of my staff. And so I would hear someone coming down the hallway, and I was at my desk, and I couldn't see them, but I knew who it was. And I knew if the pace was pretty fast, I knew there was something coming that had a little bit of anxiety, and it was a problem, and they needed to get some help with that. And I wanted to inspire them. Now, if I said, look, I don't need this today, don't bring me any more problems, I don't need this today, that would be kind of just pushing it out again and saying, I'm not going to be an inspirational leader for you today. I'm not saying that we answer their questions and that we relieve them of this, because sometimes, and most of the times, these people are very capable of solving the problems. But they want to have a conversation about this. So let's not forget our role in inspiring them, our role in action-oriented, helping them to rise to the occasion when these difficult things happen. So just in closing, this is from me, not a quote from somebody else, but the actions you take every day at work are powerful, and they're important and powerful. Seize these opportunities. Don't run away from them. Don't close your door when you know that it's coming down the pipe, but make it happen. Seize those moments every time. So use these, and I put keys in there as a picture, because these are keys to your success of being a leader. All right, now let's see. We have about 8 minutes left in our meeting, so let me see. I'm going to call upon Jody, who's maybe been monitoring the questions and comments. Do you have some things that you want to prioritize, Jody?
I do not see anything listed yet.
Okay, very good. If anybody has anything, please do so. Let us know if you have any questions that we haven't answered. I particularly like the questions that were submitted earlier on, because they actually did help me to prepare for this, and I appreciate that. You can see how that I wove them in, and they were broad enough questions. I would suspect that everybody that had challenges like this, like the ones that I brought up, probably, have experienced those same questions in their own life. Let's just pause a minute, see if there's anything else. Any questions, Jody, you see coming in that I can answer for people?
Hoyt asked, what are the top 3 leadership books you'd recommend to advance this topic?
Wow, that's a hard one. I'm looking over at my bookshelf, which is to my right here. Let me just grab one off the bookshelf just a minute. Let's see. Here's like the special talent of every leader, is you always have access to good books about leadership. So the one that I've got in my hand is one that I've mentioned, and it was on the front of my slide, Leadership Skills to Support High-Functioning Teams, written by my colleague David Lloyd at MTM Services. A very good book. It's available again at the National Council for Mental Wellbeing's bookstore. I encourage that as a great one. And I am still, but I'm sort of telling you my age. I am still inspired all the time by most things written by Jim Collins, the Good to Great author. And so I think what's inspiring about that is that he had such a science-based background to this, that he made a science out of it, and that if we do this, we'll get this kind of a result. And I just thought all those were very helpful. So those are a couple. You know, many of the leadership guides are gonna give you a lot of the things that I've done. Again, I've been a student of the Harvard Business School for a long time, and that's where I got some of this stuff. And you saw the dates that I was showing you back in 2005, 2006, where that a lot of changes I was helping to make happen in the mental health system. In North Carolina, we had already converted to fee for service, so performance was a big deal, and we needed to perform at a very high clip in order to earn the revenue to support and create it and to sustain the organization. So from the grant-funded days, we did not perform very highly, and now we had to convert ourselves over into a consumer system. So if someone didn't show up for a service today, we lost money. And so the questions were, again, how can we take responsibility for engagement? This is a great example. So we used to, in my earlier days, we blamed the client for no-shows. We blamed the client. Remember that externalization that I mentioned earlier? When instead, we were responsible for people not showing up and for people dropping out. We made it very hard to get into our system, and this might resonate again if you, when you look at your entry into the system, about how long does it take in days or hours to get into your system to get the first treatment episode. We made people jump through all kinds of hoops and essentially extended the time into days, weeks, and months before you could actually get in the door. By that time, after that time had elapsed, people were no longer interested in coming in, or they weren't confident that we could deliver any help to them. So we had to change, again, because of the environment. You know, that was changing around us. That was becoming more customer service. So those are two books. Someone else, Jody, any other questions?
Yes, we have a question from Madeline. How do you support, coach, and praise employees in a role that may not be a good fit for them?
Yes, well, that's a very good question. If the role is not a good fit for them, then there was an error made. So the real questions: can they be? Is it possible that they could change to make for them to adapt to the role? What you don't want to do, Madeline, is you don't want to adapt the role to people. Okay. It sounds good sometimes on paper to do that, but you don't, because the role is established for some purpose in the organization. So you don't want to do that. So you want to have people that adapt. Maybe this is not going to work. It's been a small number in my life, but people that got into a role that maybe were not in the right role, or because of something that occurred to them, they became mismatched. And I would say sometimes it would be because I made the wrong move if I put them in a role that was not well matched to them. So how do we know that? So the best thing to do is to always prevent that, you know, to do what we can as leaders to make sure that people get in the right role to match their particular capabilities, to help them to change if they can. But sometimes we might need to move people on, and that can be the best thing for them, to make it a better match for them, so that they will be successful. It would be very bad if people never found success in their work. And so if it's not the right role and that they can't adapt to the competencies or the needs of that role, then maybe they need to choose another job, and we can help them to do that. It sounds, I wouldn't want that to sound harsh. This can be a real big help to people to do that. So thank you. Great question, Madeline. Thank you very much. I see that we're at 2:29 on the East Coast, so we're 1 minute away from the 90 minutes. Let me thank you for being a part of this today and giving me an opportunity to come into your life and to help you. It's always an honor for me, and I will always remember the value that people placed in what I might be able to say about leadership. And I thank you again for that. If I am ever in your area and I get to help you, I'll be grateful. And remind me that you did get to attend this program, and I'll have a big smile on my face. Thanks so much for all your help, everyone. Again, that recording will be available. Jody, you want to say something about that before we close out?
Yeah, that recording, you'll receive an email that'll have the link to the recording, but it'll also be placed on our website once we get that downloaded and then put on the MTM Services website. So stay tuned and we'll get an email out to you in the next 48 hours.
Right. Thanks so much, Jody, for helping us, being on the end here for me, and thank you again for attending. You all have a great day, a great rest of the week, and we look forward to working with you again sometime. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody.